I meet him for the first time, and he says that, ever since he wrote in that collection of short stories called Who Can Save Us Now, which was edited by Owen King, uh, and that, he's actually being approached by both Vertigo and Marvel to pitch comic work. And so
Wow.
we start talking. And that person, of course, is Scott Snyder.
This is Ross Richie. I'm the Chief Executive Officer and the founder of Boom Studios. And much to my joy, I'm going to share with you an interview with one of the hottest comic book writers in the space, James Tynion IV. He's the writer of Batman, as well as Something is Killing the Children and the massive hit Department of Truth. So this is a long form interview. We really get into the weeds and talk about technical details, inspirations, and James's creative life and what has shaped him as a creator. And so I encourage you to dig deep. This one's going to be a long one. It's an hour, about 10, 15 minutes. And I've got a follow-up one where he talks more in depth about other stuff for another hour, 10, 15 minutes I'll be putting up soon. So check out this interview with James Tynion. I hope you enjoy it. And thank you so much. Hit the like and the subscribe button. You're looking good, brother.
Thank you. You as well. I'm sure I think the shadows help mask the deep shadows under my eyes. So
well, is it
like
I think
my
those
glasses work in my favor.
Well, I think deep shadows under your eyes is called being a writer. Right?
That is 100%. Yeah.
I mean, my wife's a screenwriter, and she just doesn't work on the underneath the crushing deadlines that are comic book publishing. So I mean, I can't even imagine the degree to which you're so prolific. The way that you're turning stuff around, is just, I mean, plus, I read enough of the newsletter that I know that, you're a night owl. So
yeah, no, I am definitely, I like staying up late working because it's sort of that quiet time. It's just there are so few distractions. No one's emailing me, no one's trying to get on the phone. I can just sort of get into a flow. And I will say the quarantine, I've been real bad about it because I had gotten so much better about only very occasionally pulling a really late night shift. But now that we're all like still more or less trapped at home all the time, it's they're like I'm sort of reclaiming more of my schedule at night than I probably should.
Well, but I I'd be interested in your perspective, but to me it feels like, the way that everything picked up with Punchline and all that sort of stuff. I mean, your plate has gotten a lot more full. You add the Tiny Onion stuff to it, and you're just in this. I would imagine you just have a lot more going on. But like let's for just a second indulge me and like give me the framework of like you're shooting to wake up at what time you've allocated, or maybe it's just it is what it is, and that's fine. But
I should have more of a schedule. I wish I was a rigid sort of like I wake up at like I can tell you what the dream version that I'm trying to transition to.
Sure.
What I am, because now I have like right now I'm in my home office in my apartment in Brooklyn. I have an external office a few neighborhoods north of Williamsburg that I need to like put some art on the walls and put a chair in there, but I have a desk and a nice big computer in there. And the goal is, wake up between 8 and 9, be in the office by 10, work until 6 or 7, and come home. And then when I come home, I don't work anymore. Like that's the goal.
Okay.
But like I would say that I got that office about in last November, and I would say that maybe there are probably 4 or 5 weeks that I have done that successfully in the last
Wow.
year.
Wow.
Uh, so aside from that, I'm like I just sort of work from home. I tend to like I'm a night owl, so unless I'm really trying to get up early, I'll wake up around 10.
Okay.
And then I try to get into the office, like get in front of the computer by 11. Normally the first few hours I'm dealing with a lot of logistics. That's when I'm responding to the most emails. That's when I'm
Yep.
checking in with editors. If I
Yep.
have I try to schedule my phone calls sort of like right around noon
Yep.
in most days. And then really it's sort of mid-afternoon into the evening is when I can kind of get into a flow because I've taken care of all of the little things that were dangling overhead,
Yep.
and then I can kind of focus and I can get into a rhythm. And then once I'm in a rhythm, I just try to ride it out. And I'm thankfully when I'm writing, I write quick. But I'm a sprinter. I'm not a I My life would be a lot easier if I was just capable of, like clockwork, knocking out 5 pages a day. But it's
Mhm.
more for me. I do more like 3 days of doing a lot of legwork, and then in one day I will write 15 pages, and then the next day I will finish the issue and put the final polish on the previous 15 pages and turn it in.
Yeah.
So that's much more what I'm trying to do. And then some weeks it's I have 2 or sometimes even 3 scripts on my plate, and that's when staying up all night writing
Right.
becomes
You
a bit more
claim
necessary.
claim the extra time. All right, so let's go all the way back. So first of all, how the hell do you pronounce your name?
It's Tynan. So
Tynan.
the
Yes.
the more traditional Irish spelling is Tynan, and my
Mhm.
family still pronounces it that way. My great grandfather, when he came to the country, his name was spelled that way. By the time he got married, on the marriage certificate, it was spelled the current way.
Yeah.
And I think my own pet theory is that it was just to try to make his name sound less Irish and to make it
Oh,
sound
interesting.
a bit more like it was from abstractly Europe, not Ireland. So
Like so this is something that I find fascinating and worth discussing. It's like we live in such a polarizing time period, and there are so many different people from all over the world that come to America, and we're cooperating, and we see each other's differences. But like what I like to talk about with my wife is like 100 years ago, there were Italians were fighting Irish.
mhm,
Like we're watching the latest season of Fargo,
me
and
too.
yeah, right. So there's the opener where it's like the warring the Irish and the Italians,
Yeah.
and there's all of these derisive names for um, all these white people that have figured out a reason to fight each other, right?
Mhm.
And to hate each other, and so that's a fascinating, coming to America. I'm such a dork because I'm a huge U2 fan. So you say Ireland to me, and I get all excited, you know. So, but it's just mind blowing to think about. And do you know like the time period? Was it the 1800s or the 1900s or?
It would have been 1800s. I think about the 1880s.
Wow, wow,
Yeah.
wow, wow, wow. And did the Ellis Island thing with like the
Our family came in through Boston rather than
okay.
New York, and then I also have a bunch of family up in Newfoundland,
Oh wow.
because that Newfoundland is very much the people who could afford to get on a boat leaving Ireland but could not afford the full journey to the U.S.
Oh,
The first
interesting.
stop was St. John's, Newfoundland. So
Oh.
those people sort of went off and started a farmstead there. So my grandma grew up in Newfoundland, but then my grandfather and his family, uh, grew up in Brooklyn. So like even though our family came in through Boston and
Uh-huh.
then made our way down to New York. and then
Oh,
once we were in,
okay.
like, then from then on, my family's been a New York-based family, and Brooklyn in particular.
I remember when you moved to Los Angeles and how much you hated it. And you and I never talked about it, but I always thought that that's a hallmark of a generational New Yorker. You know, the two places, I'm not native to Los Angeles, so happy to critique it, right? I love the town, it's great, but you know, everything's got pluses and minuses.
Yeah.
But I think that in particular, the way that Los Angeles and New York are laid out is that they are in opposition to each other. You know,
Yes.
New York is stacked on itself and really fosters community. Howard Chaykin wrote a foreword or an afterword to the Iron Wolf graphic novel that he did with Mike Mignola in the early 90s. And in his bio, it said, Howard Chaykin lives alone in Los Angeles just like everyone else. And I
That
thought
sounds about
that
right.
was isn't that the best descriptor? So like Los
Yeah.
Angeles, like is like anti-community. And I think for New Yorkers, it's such a difficult transition to go into this, you know, you can't walk out the door and hop, skip, and jump down to a bar and have a room full of people that you can, and the New Yorker style of just striking up conversations and kind of speaking your mind
Yeah.
and being unafraid of the possible abrasive consequences is such a totally different culture. You know, like one of the things I'm Texan originally by birth. And so one of the things I love about America is I think we are so many different cultures that are stitched together like a quilt.
Yeah.
And there's this overarching sort of like aspirational idea of what it means to be American. And, but we also don't, we often don't value our different regional differences.
Yes.
And I think that they're wonderful. I love all the different places in the United States and how they have their different, you know, as a Texan, for me to even be able to say I love Oklahoma, I need an award because of the rivalry between the two places. But they're also regionally different. It's so cool. But anyway, okay, so
Yeah.
Tynan,
Yeah.
not Tinian,
Not Tinian.
not Tinian. And for those not following along, of course I knew the difference, but I wanted to make sure that everybody could hear it. And okay, so mom and dad in New York, so city or boroughs, or you know, I'm so
So
bad at New York. I'm just proud that I knew to ask the question of the differentiation, or
so
Jersey, or
so my dad grew up in Bay Ridge, Brooklyn, which is the southern tip, the southern bit of Brooklyn. It's right by the Verrazano Bridge that then leads over to Staten
gotcha.
Island. So that's where my dad and my uncles and I still have lots of cousins down in and around Bay Ridge. So my mom grew up in Milwaukee, Wisconsin.
Oh
Also
wow,
also an Irish American family. Also
wow,
came in around the 1880s, but they settled. They went further into the country and then ended up settling in Milwaukee. So that so
that's fascinating.
and then so my parents sort of met each other living, when they both ended up moving to Manhattan.
Okay,
Even though they had gone to college together, they didn't know each other in college at
wow.
Georgetown. And then met each other through friends in the city while my dad was in law school and my
Huh.
mom was working in advertising. And then I was born in Manhattan, but then ended up when I was 5 years old moving to Milwaukee, and I lived there
Wow.
until I was I graduated high school, and then I went to
Wow.
college back in New York, and then have pretty much stayed here since, except for 3 years in Los Angeles.
And so when you went back to Milwaukee, or rather back the first time you went to Milwaukee, was that your parents splitting up, or the whole family went, or?
Uh, the the whole family went, and then
Yeah,
shortly thereafter, my parents divorced. But
gotcha.
you know, and then so yeah, and then now my dad's back in the city after my sister and everyone like was grown up and raised. But and then my mom is sort of lives in 6 different places. But
But Milwaukee, I really enjoyed the last time I went to Milwaukee. It must have been like the mid aughts. I mean, so it's been 10, 15 years, but I really enjoyed it. And in the 80s, that was like a real manufacturing, Midwestern area, and then it
Yeah.
transformed in the 90s. It kind of, and you were right in the middle of all of that. And
Yeah.
so that's really interesting to me, of like having such strong New York ties, but then, you're in an area that can be incredibly rural and at the same time has some urbane qualities to it. I saw a very artistic community when I was there. And I
Oh
don't know
yeah.
if that reflects the way you grew up, but yeah.
No, it was honestly, there's a great art scene in Milwaukee. There's a great theater scene there,
Oh,
and uh, you
that's
know,
rare.
and honestly, there were a lot of really good outlets, and for a lot of things, and there were comic shops, which I was very grateful for. um, but
Well,
it, yeah,
have you and I ever talked about, the tradition coming out of Madison of the comic book influence? That's one
yeah.
of the great comic book hubs in the United States.
Yeah, no, and it was strange. I spent one summer living in Madison in between, one year of college, because most of my friends from high school, they went to UW Madison. So every time I was
Gotcha.
home when I was in college, I would say hi to my parents, and then I would just hop in my car and drive to Madison.
Yep.
Uh, and so it was one of those things where I love that history. The history is of the indie alternative scene that was
Yep.
out there, the like zine community and all of that was really really huge. But honestly, by the 2000s, it had pretty much died out, and there
Gotcha.
wasn't like there were very few traces of it. Even though I was like looking for it, it was more you could get some of the old guard to
Hmm.
sort of talk about like back in the day, but most of
Hmm.
the players had left the area,
Yep.
so long ago. And I mean, it was the same thing with the Onion. The Onion was rooted out of Madison and then sort of migrated away from Wisconsin over the years. But it was there. There's a like Madison is a great town. I love Madison. I love all of Wisconsin. Like honestly, there's a reason that Something Is Killing the Children, The Woods, pretty much everything I've written takes place in Wisconsin. I figured that was me, making the decision at the start of my career that I was going to do the Stephen King Maine thing and just like create fictional towns in the state I actually grew up in.
Oh, that's
But
great.
I really really love Wisconsin, and it's a place that because it's a fascinating place, and it's a place that's full of contradictions. Like one of my favorite facts, like growing up, especially like being in high school during like peak Bush era, like
Hmm.
that was like it. So it was a very divisive time, and it was Wisconsin is a swing state. It's a very purple state.
Right, right.
Um, but the thing that was like really fascinating to me was about Wisconsin history is that at the same time, Senator Joe McCarthy was the senator from Wisconsin.
Uh-huh.
Milwaukee had an actual socialist mayor, like and from the Socialist
Wow.
Party, like and who was one of the most popular politicians in the state. So this
Wow.
like Wisconsin as a state, and which means that there were probably hundreds, if not thousands, of people in Milwaukee who were probably voting for both Joe McCarthy and the
Right.
socialist mayor of the city simultaneously, which
That's
is just
fascinating.
like it is the so there was something that I do like that's sort of embedded in me of that. I like the I like places that have contradictions like that, and I like
Mhm.
their and especially like human contradictions. And so Wisconsin's always been like that mixture of rural and urban, that mixture of like left and right,
Mhm.
um, and just all of that kind of blends itself together into like this region that still speaks to me, quite strongly.
Now, I got to take a little detour of fun, because when I was in Milwaukee, the taking a tour, I think it was Lakeshore Brewery,
Yeah,
and they ask where before they embark on the tour, they ask you where you're from,
yeah.
and so they went through all the groups that were tourists at different places, and then at the end they leaned in and they go, "There's not anybody here from Chicago, is there?" and and I was floored. I was like, oh wow, because I'm not from the area, so I don't know about the regional rivalry.
Oh
And
yeah,
And so, that I'm interested in that. Like, what kind of relationship did you have with Chicago? What was it like? And then the other thing is, I'm an old school RPG guy, and Lake Geneva is the birthplace of D&D and role playing. And
Yeah.
was that an influence? But
So so the Chicago rivalry is interesting because I came at that through because that's mostly through sports, and I was never a
okay,
sports person.
right.
And like I know that there are terms like I think it's fibs for fake Illinois bastard. Like but it's I worked one summer at Miller Stadium where the Brewers play,
Gotcha.
just passing out. I wasn't, I was 18 years old, so they didn't let me pass out anything that actually sells. I was selling ice cream on the top, like the
Upper
highest
deck.
balcony,
Yeah.
like just and no and unless it was a Cubs game,
Yeah.
those seats were empty.
Right.
And B, it's so fucking cold up there that
Right.
nobody wants ice cream.
Right.
So
Right.
it's like me going around like selling nothing for
Oh,
a full baseball game. Yeah, so
brutal.
I did that for one season, and that was enough.
That was enough. No, thank you.
But honestly, it's something where I have my own like Chicago rivalry because my mom ended up moving to Chicago, and so we would with my stepdad lives in Chicago, so we would go down there for holidays and stuff like that. I spent a lot of time in Chicago, but I definitely built this whole thing up that like especially it's like going to Chicago versus going to like New York. Visiting New York
Right.
felt like visiting like a big city proper, and visiting Chicago felt like visiting something that felt almost like a big city but wasn't quite, because nobody actually lives in the downtown parts of Chicago
Right.
except for my mom. And so it was just like going to a place where everything closed at night, and it was just like
Right.
it and now as an adult, I have been introduced to the many vibrant communities of Chicago, which mostly are around the downtown area, not the area
Right.
itself. But so I had like strong Chicago opinions because I was a like moody teenager who had strong opinions about everything.
Sure.
But less about the regional rivalries and more
Right.
about like my mom dragging me down there for holidays when I would rather like go watch movies over the room above my friend's garage.
Right.
Like, yeah.
Makes
So,
sense. Makes sense.
and Lake Geneva and the whole like role playing world, that was, I was never a big D&D person. I've played a
Gotcha.
few times. I've had friends who were like super into it, but that was never the form my geekdom
Yeah.
took. So
Makes
it was
sense.
something that Magic the Gathering got
Yep.
really big in my friend group around that time. And actually, when my mom was working in advertising, she did like, and this is something that it's like it's like an apocryphal story. There's no way to know whether or not it's true.
Yep.
But when my mom was in advertising in New York before we moved to Wisconsin, one of her clients, one of her prospective clients, was going to be Wizards of the Coast, right around the launch of Magic for the first time. And so
Whoa.
my mom was given a couple of their early decks, and
Whoa.
my mom sort of kept them in safekeeping, but then they have since been
Where,
lost. So
oh, I was about to
they
ask where
would
your mom lives. So I
that would
was
have
going to
been
head on over.
like so the lost, like in my head it's like the original two like decks, and it probably wasn't. It
Right.
probably like was some promotional thing that not the real deal. But my mom actually like did worked around a bunch of like geek stuff very briefly towards the
Wow.
end of like, and she's not a geeky person at all, but one person she met through the advertising world was because my mom's clients was Harley Davidson, and what
Oh,
ended
wow.
up bringing us uh to Milwaukee was my mom became their global head of marketing.
Gotcha.
And
There
but
you
the
go.
when when it was just one of her clients, one of the investors in a Harley Davidson restaurant in New York City that they were trying to do, that she got to know decently well, was Avi Arad.
Wow.
And
So
so
let's tell everybody who Avi Arad is. Avi was one of the principals behind Marvel in the 90s all the way through the aughts, and helped transition them into the feature world through Blade and the X-Men. Was a
yeah,
real pivotal figure in getting Toy Biz together with Marvel and
yeah.
that whole era. So huge figure. That's amazing.
So I got I have a signed, and I need to go through because they're in storage right now, but I have these two signed posters of Marvel characters
Yeah.
that my mom got me when I was 5 years old. That they're definitely both signed by Stan Lee, but they're signed by like 20 other people, and I haven't, like, I assume it's just like the editorial offices. Like,
I'm
told
such a
Bob
dork.
Harris about this once, and I was just like, I bet your signature is on one of these things.
Send me a shot of that sometime. I bet you I could help you with that. Because
I absolutely will.
I was at Malibu. That's another story. But Malibu got bought by Marvel, so I know a bunch of those folks from that era.
Yeah.
All right, so let's make the transition to the young Tynan. So, I would imagine it's usually junior high, right? Is
Yeah.
when you start to go, And so, what were the things that hit you first that got you excited in fandom?
Well, I would even a little younger than that would have been the Spider-Man, X-Men, and Batman animated series.
Gotcha.
Like all of those coming on, like that's what made me love superheroes. That's what made
Oh.
me love, and the action figures.
Mhm.
I watched the animated series and I had all of the action figures. And that's and from there I started picking up the DK essential guides to like all of
Oh,
the,
yeah.
like, they were like encyclopedias of here's all the X-Men and here's how they're all connected to each other, and all
Yep.
of that. And so I started piecing all of that together. And then I would say once a year or so, like my dad, whether we were on a trip or something, my dad would take me to a comic shop and I would be
Mm.
able to kind of pick out some random things. And uh, during one trip, I picked up I fixated on a very weird thing, which was uh, it was I think it's the essential guide to the X-Men, and it was like five comics that laid out and with a brief summary of every single issue of Uncanny X-Men,
Wow.
up until probably, like, the early 90s. So
Wow.
it was like, and so for years I knew the whole history of the X-Men because I studied those issues, but I hadn't actually read the stories about them. I just sort of like started piecing them together in my head.
Yeah.
And then I would say a turning point was one of those trips. It would have been concurrent or directly after the Age of Apocalypse. It would have
Mm.
probably been directly after because all of the issues were out.
Mm.
So I was able to, so I bought basically all of the Age of Apocalypse in single issues, and I just read those, and it was the first, the X-Men Alpha and X-Men Omega with the foil covers. Like,
Yep.
it was just the coolest fucking thing I had ever seen.
Yep.
And that, like, I lost my mind about that. And that, so those were sort of the formative pieces. But it was in middle school, around 7th or 8th grade, that I had a friend who was really into comic books. He was a big Green Lantern fan. He's the one who introduced me to Kyle Rayner, and I
Oh,
read
wow.
up all of his Kyle Rayner comics. And from that, I started re-embracing I started embracing comics really for the first time.
Mm.
And around that time, my mom moved into an apartment that was across the street from a strip mall that had a Borders books in it. And so
Mm.
I started going to that Borders books, and I read every single comic trade on the shelf. And
So
that,
I stepped
yeah,
over you at Borders. That's 'cause I always remember those kids because I would go check the section, and you're always
Oh,
stepping
yeah,
over like two or three kids that are sitting on the carpet, you know.
absolutely. And I actually ended up getting a job at that Borders because I was the kid who would come in and rearrange all of the shelves because those shelves used to be arranged just like nobody knew how to do it. So it was just chaos. It was just randomly put together.
That's amazing.
So I just started rearranging those shelves. Everyone in that Borders knew who I was, and then like and I started like using my allowance to get the books that like really connected with me, and some of the big ones like Kingdom Come,
Mm,
like just completely knocked me over.
yeah.
But I'd say that that is the biggest reason that I am more of a DC person than a Marvel
Mhm.
person, is
Mhm.
because Marvel, like consistently, even to this day, really has been shit about keeping its stuff collected and in print.
Interesting.
And so I was reading all of the DC classics because they were in stores and in
Right.
stock. And because I didn't have a comic shop like available to me until I was a little bit older and I had a car, like I knew everything about DC, and Marvel books I would only pick up every now and then. And the things that but I could pick up Wizard magazine, and Wizard
Right.
magazine told me that there was this exciting thing called the Ultimate line that was starting, and
Wow.
I got my hands on one, and I got the little subscription slip, so I
Wow.
subscribed to the entire Ultimate. And then so I was reading DC trades and Borders, and I was getting Marvel Ultimate Comics sent to my house, and that was me transitioning into being a full-time comic book person. And once I had a car, I was going every single Wednesday.
Well, it's fascinating where you're describing someone that is, obviously would have been a direct market customer in comic shops, but you're existing without a comic shop.
Yeah,
You're existing through old school subscription and through, a bookstore. So
yeah,
that's a pretty fascinating to an old professional like me that thinks about distribution patterns in retail so much. It's pretty interesting that you got so knowledgeable and went so deep, and it was totally outside of a comic shop. So that's interesting. Of course, and it migrated you in, which is the Brian Hibbs philosophy, which I think is accurate. So
yeah.
anyway, okay. So how old are you when you get the Borders job? Just for fun.
I would have been around, I think I would have been like 17, 18 years old.
Okay.
But I'd been going to that border since I was about 14, 15 years old.
Gotcha. Gotcha. So then at what point are you thinking, I want to write these?
So the real transition point was when I was in, because I'd wanted to like do comics. I knew I loved comics, and I thought, I like every comic book writer, I wanted to be an artist. And
Hmm.
I,
Hmm.
you
See,
know,
that's interesting. I think most people don't know that,
oh yeah,
but
no,
it's true.
yeah, no,
Yeah.
100%. And it was me sketching characters in my notebooks, and very poorly, like
Hmm.
that was not any good. But I wanted to, like, part of the reason I ended up like I wanted to go to the high school I ended up going to, it was because it had a really strong arts program, and I wanted
Wow.
to like learn how to draw and all of that. And so did my friend who was really into Green Lantern. And
Mm.
so that was sort of the goal. But honestly, I learned very quickly in like one semester of taking a high school art class that I did not have the patience
Wow.
to just like to do finished work. So
So,
I started shifting more and more like into reading, and then and then I was just like, you know what, I want to be a writer.
mm,
And I wanted to read everything and all that, but I thought that I was going to be like a book writer. um
mm,
and it but it was when it was reading Sandman. It was reading Sandman probably my
wow.
junior year in high school, where it was just like, oh, comics aren't just superheroes. Comics can
Mm,
be so many different things. And all, like, the fact that Sandman was like wrapping together all of these very different things that I was like really really interested in just blew my mind. Like the idea that you could just weave all of that together, just
Mm-hmm.
like I did, like I never didn't think it was possible that you would have to, you kind of had to choose, like if you were going to do a superhero story or this, and it's like, here's a comic that's like a horror story and a fantasy story and a very modern story with real grounded characters, and it's like got the Norse gods and the devil and all of this stuff all together, and it was just so cool. It was so freaking cool.
Well,
And that tipped me over.
on a craft basis, as two people that work in the business, I think I think what you're pointing out that I really want to highlight is, Neil was able to create something that was his framework,
Yeah.
but it was done within the DC Comics framework. And that's that approach to sort of go to, the era that it was created, DC was giving creators an opportunity to reskin and reinvent a lot of library characters, many of which had not had much success. And so this iteration of Sandman prior to Neil was never very successful. It was the 40s when it was working.
Yeah.
But I think the tip is, how do you, as a conceptualist, sort of give yourself as a writer this framework that gives you the advantage,
Yeah.
so that you can imbue the things that are interesting to you into that, as opposed to being more on your heels and going, well, I'm not really much of a continuity person, and Sandman's not my favorite character, and what am I going to do with this 1940s comic? It's
Right.
pretty out of date, and he just pretty much threw it out the window, and turned it into something that played to all his strengths. And so I think that's a good creative sort of like a line of progression to go down. It can be very successful to set you up as a talent to be able to show what makes you distinctive, and also makes it much easier to write, right? Because
Yeah.
it's something you want to write, as opposed to a series of obstacles that you're doing for a paycheck. But anyway, forgive the tangent. But the okay, so you're in a place where you're like, I'm going to go write novels,
Right.
right?
And especially like, even, you know, because obviously Sandman then led me into Neil Gaiman's, like, novel work. And then,
Right.
and even more so, it was kind of okay, I love comics. I want to write comics, but how Neil Gaiman is now the figure that I am looking at. So I'm trying to figure out, how did he get into comics? And the way
Interesting.
he got into comics was he was a nonfiction writer, and he got and his work got the attention of Alan Moore, that then put his work in front of Karen Berger. And
Mhm.
that was how, he got in. So it's just like, it was very much, and and especially in that moment, and even today, Neil Gaiman was being very active online with, he had a journal, the Neil Gaiman journal that he was posting on his own blog, that had all sorts of advice about breaking in, and a lot of it was just like, find every excuse to write,
Mhm.
and just write. And it's not like there was a school that was offering a degree in comic book writing, but there were schools that were offering degrees in writing. So it was just
Mhm.
like, okay, so I need to figure out how to become a really good writer, and then hopefully I can get my work in front of somebody who then gives me the leg up. And
Mhm.
that became the model that I was trying to shoot for, from junior year of high school onward. um
Wow. Wow.
so
That's powerful. So then, did you go to college?
I did. I went to Sarah Lawrence College,
Okay.
and and that was after, like, I from that point in high school, I was taking, like, I did a summer program at Kenyon College for writing, and I was my high school offered a writing class, and it was me sort of like, I was going hard down that path. There wasn't
Mhm.
I was not I have the benefit of being a pretty single-minded person. I didn't really consider other other paths. I just sort of like put all of my efforts into this path, like, much to my, like, which terrified my parents. But
So
uh,
so did you get the have a backup plan speech?
Oh yeah, constantly. And it was just, and I think part of the benefit was because my mom came out of advertising.
Mhm.
My mom knew that there was a business end of creative, that even if
Mm,
I went into a creative field, I could still go get a desk job if I needed to. Um,
mhm.
so it was just like, so I think there was a bit more of a like, hey, yes, go do this, but while you're doing this, maybe you should consider going to get an internship at such and such a place. And I didn't end up like going to do an internship. I did end up working in advertising for a year, but it's that like but that was sort of like being able, it also gave me an answer to, if when my mom was being like, are you sure you want to pursue writing, it's just like, well, I want to pursue this, but yes, of course, like I can go get a day job and this or that, and that would satisfy the worry in the moment. uh,
You have the trap door. What I do want to call out that's kind of interesting is you have a mother that, advertising is creative work. So you
yeah,
have a creative mother, and then you've got an attorney father who's a wordsmith.
yeah.
At the end of the day, that's what attorneys are, is they traffic in the power of words. They do it in an argumentative fashion and can be contrarian, but that's the subject of a different conversation. But
But well, and my dad primarily is he's a lawyer on the sort of banking side of law. So he,
gotcha.
and specifically in he was one of the first lawyers to specialize in renewable energies.
Oh,
So
wow.
so he's been in that field, specifically wind energy, for a long time. So that so really his career was very much about people, and it was always about relationships. So the biggest things that my dad was teaching me growing up was very much, like, it was like, it was good dad advice. It was very much like, okay, when you're having like going out into the world, everyone else is more like, you just have to remember that everyone else is more interesting than you, and you're going to learn something from every conversation. So you always want to be asking people, and you always want to just absorb everything they have to say. And
That
that, like,
What great advice.
so, and that's what I took from my dad, first and foremost. And my mom was definitely a bit more of the, she had a bit more like ruthless ambition in
Oh,
her,
interesting.
like
Okay.
trying to take over the world. I think I get those instincts from my mom, and I think I get some of my more collaborative instincts from my dad.
Huh. That's really cool. That's
Yeah,
fascinating. Okay, so I know very little to nothing about Sarah Lawrence. So
yeah.
what was sort of your why Sarah Lawrence? What were your aspirations? What was it like when you got there? Was it what you thought it was?
Oh yeah. I mean, so Sarah Lawrence is a small liberal arts college, just north of New York City. I loved New York, but I had, like, I checked out NYU, but it didn't really have it didn't feel like a college so much.
Right.
It was just throwing you right in the middle of the city.
Yep.
Which, at that point, I was still, as much as I loved New York in concept, the idea of just being dropped in the middle of the city at age 18 like scared the crap out of me.
Yep.
And so I liked the small environment of Sarah Lawrence. I liked the fact, like, I especially liked the fact that Joseph Campbell used to be a teacher there.
Wow.
And so
Are
and I
you a
was,
Campbell fan?
oh yes, and one of my favorite high school teacher taught a whole course on the
Wow.
American hero and the
Wow.
cosmogonic cycle, and the everything from the hero's journey, and
That's
that
huge.
that was all like baked into my head. And I was the first person, I showed him like Kingdom Come and Watchmen for the first
Wow.
time, and that, like, I actually ended up writing that English teacher into an early issue of Batman that I did, and I had Mr. Freeze kill him with a crayon, which my Mr. Carney, my teacher, was very excited to buy.
That
Um,
that's fascinating. We're backing up a bit, but you
yeah,
have an authority figure in your life that gives you a context to process the mythology that you had fallen in love with.
Yeah,
sort of gives you a overview and a framework for it to be taken seriously, and for you
absolutely.
to really sort of emotionally embrace, sort of, and I know that we're not at the point where you're like, I'm going to write comics yet,
Yeah.
but still within sort of the framework that you're talking about, the Neil Gaiman, you'd mentioned Stephen King. I presume that there's some Stephen King on rotation by
Oh,
this point.
yes.
Yeah.
Absolutely, yes.
So within those genre writers that are, have great literary dimension, I don't, say that they don't, but
Yeah.
that's still genre writers. So it's like, that's huge. That is huge.
No, and
Wow.
that
Okay.
so it definitely opened my eyes in terms of like giving me an analytical framework to look at story, and also, because I mean, they were tools that were being given to me as analysis tools, but I was seeing them as like construction, like it was a blueprint.
Right.
And especially knowing that George Lucas built
Mhm.
Star Wars very deliberately, using the hero's journey and all of that, like all of that, like got into my head, and I was very excited about it. And then,
Wow.
even though like Neil Gaiman has said that he has never actually read the hero's journey because he knows he traffics in the same archetypal sort of thinking. He just doesn't do it like deliberately, so he doesn't want that to drive him or affect him.
Yep.
But it meant that like but the hero's journey and the idea of all of these archetypes and the idea of like symbolism, the way that Joseph Campbell talks about it, definitely tied directly into how I was reading Sandman, how I was reading all of these things, and
Wow.
kept all of comics in this kind of elevated space. The other teacher I should call out, who was also a high school teacher of mine, her name was Midori Snyder, and she was a fantasy paperback author who taught a couple of oddball classes at my all boys Catholic high school
Mhm.
about genre fiction. And it was in one of her classes that and I was an unusual student because the way my high school worked is you had a number of elective slots, and
Wow.
as you got, like, by the time you were a senior, you were allowed to sort of use free periods in some of those elective slots. I literally filled every elective slot with an English class, like,
Wow.
and so I was effective. I actually had to get permission from the dean because I was treating myself as an English major as a high school senior. um
That's
and
incredible.
I mean, and also, just to be blunt, it's not like I was an A student in those classes. I was like I am a consistent all my life B plus student.
Ah,
Like,
interesting.
I was always the kid in the class. And I have friends who are teachers who have like confirmed there is this archetype who's like, I was the kid in the class that the teachers like had a closer relationship with because I would develop a very close relationship with the teacher, and then they would always be like, James, I know you can do better than this. So it's like, I was the teacher's favorite but not their best student, and that started a trend.
But for the quick tangent, so I know you can do better. Could you?
Yeah, no,
So why weren't you?
I have issues with people telling me what to do.
Ah, there we go.
So I liked seeing what I could get away with, uh, especially in classes and classwork, in terms of what can I get away with not doing? What can I get away with, like, if I'm given a prompt, can I do the opposite of that prompt, and see if I can get away with it? And like, so some teachers hated me because of
Right.
that. The person who was teaching writing in my high school really hated me because I was just writing. I was writing more than almost any other student in the class, but I wasn't following the prompts at all, and I was kind of like, I thought, and in a way that as a 17-year-old, I thought I was being very clever, but it was definitely me like attacking the concept of the prompt itself, and trying to dismantle it. So, which was, it must have read like totally overbearing and like pretentious 17-year-old stuff, but that,
That's your
like,
job when you're 17.
yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
So, all of that sort of blended together.
Mhm.
And then sent me towards Sarah Lawrence.
Okay, so you landed Sarah Lawrence, and I presume you're an English major?
Yes. Yeah.
Yep.
And
And how'd that
specifically,
go?
it went very well. And I really enjoy, like, I to the end I was a B+ student. But I really liked actually being a part of writing workshops. Writing
Mhm.
workshops were really important to me.
Mm.
That it was seeing, especially it was very interesting to see who was there in the class trying to figure out how to make it work, and who was there just because it was a class and they were trying, just seeing whether or not they liked writing, or it was much more of a hobbyist sort of thing. But I was always, the teachers would often ask, like, who in this class actually wants to pursue writing as a career? And it was always me and two other kids in a class of, like, 8 to 12 students,
Yep.
to, like, saying that. And, Sarah Lawrence works a little differently. It's built on a system based, like, on a kind of corrupted version of the Oxford system, where you have every single class, like, you only take 3 classes a semester,
Mhm.
but in addition to every class, you do an independent study on the same
Oh,
topic
wow. Okay.
of that, and you work directly with your professor to build the independent study. And that's part of what drew me to Sarah Lawrence, because it's a lot of self-driven work rather than assignment-driven work.
Mhm.
Uh, and it's the sort of thing where, when you're going on a class tour, like a school tour there, while you're applying, they'll bring up the time that, like, such and such a person did their independent study for their physics class as an experimental dance piece, like. And it's one of those sorts of things where it's like, oh, that's so exciting. More typically, everyone just writes a 30-page paper on a
Right.
topic that's interesting to them. But that really started letting me engage in all of this. But the element that to that system that I really loved was that you interview your teachers. To you
Wow.
basically, you see, here are all the classes available.
Mhm.
You go and you schedule some interviews with the teachers of the classes that sound the most interesting, and then you decide which classes you want to take based
Wow.
on, like, who's someone who you actually could have a working relationship with, to develop an independent paper, like,
That's
over the course
amazing.
of 6 months.
Yeah.
And so it was my junior year, and I was looking at the different options for writing workshops for the next year, and I saw that there was this one writing professor who is brand new or whose name I hadn't seen offered as a class before. Who had written one book of short stories, and then had a story in another book of short stories that was about superhero themed short stories. And I was just like, oh, cool. This is someone who will actually understand the sort of genre work and everything that I do that. And I go and I schedule an interview with that person. And I meet him for the first time. And he says that, ever since he wrote in that collection of short stories called Who Can Save Us Now, which was edited by Owen King, uh, and that he's actually being approached by both Vertigo and Marvel to pitch comic work. And so
Wow.
we start talking, and that person, of course, is Scott Snyder.
That's
And this
amazing.
is before he has written a single comic book. And so I
So
take a
there, so
yeah,
there's another way to break in,
yeah.
right? So go find a slot in a superhero anthology that's a prose based short story
Oh yeah.
collection of short stories, not a graphic novel anthology.
And
That's amazing.
it's there's even more funny stories about that specific moment, because at that time he didn't understand why he was being approached by these two different editors, one from DC, one from Marvel. And, like, they seemed to be coming as a united block, even though they were from these rival sides. Because he didn't realize that Mark Doyle and Janine Schaefer were a couple, and they went to a reading at the Strand in New York City, and that's where they found out about Scott's work. So they were both chasing him,
Wow,
you know,
that's incredible. And
so
so
yeah,
to put some other context in it, Janine works at Boom today.
yeah,
So just for the folks that don't know. So wow, what a small world. That is amazing. So you've got a married couple that goes to the same event, reads the same material, and goes after the same writer, but that one works
yeah,
for Marvel, one works for DC. Crazy. That's a
yep,
gotta get. And
yeah,
I didn't get that story from Janine. That's too much fun.
yeah,
Okay, so cool. So bam, you found the
yeah.
guy.
Yeah, and I mean, at that moment, this is, it was when I was in class with him. This is still before he has had a single published comic book.
Hmm.
It was a regular fiction class, but I started developing a bit of a repertoire with him, and specifically, he is developing the pitch for American Vampire, and
Wow.
he is, and the one day, like I'm having my one-on-one meeting with him, and he says, "Would you have any interest in reading the pitch that I'm
Wow.
about to send over to Vertigo?" And I get that pitch from him, and instead of just like being like, "Oh man, this is so cool," I give him 10 pages of notes on
Whoa.
on the pitch. And then literally from that moment on, Scott has sent me every single thing he's ever written. Um,
Wow. So
so yeah,
so miraculous that he was receptive,
yes,
first of all, because a lot of people say they are and they're not, which,
yeah,
that's fine.
yeah,
You have to follow your artistic vision. But miraculous that he was receptive, and then beyond that, miraculous that, young whippersnapper actually has something to contribute, right?
yeah.
So that's pretty incredible. And then and did I mean, were things incorporated?
Yeah, no, there were definitely
Wow.
some pieces that ended up in. Plenty didn't. Like there were plenty
Sure.
of ideas that ended up having nothing to do with it. But there were some core pieces about the basic mythology of American Vampire that I kind of threw some ideas in for, and then that led to I was the next year, like he was starting to pitch for even bigger books at DC while I was studying abroad in Ireland for a semester, and
Okay.
I would like be pacing the parking lot in the middle of the night in Ireland on the phone with Scott, going over like what he's going to be pitching. And that really set the stage for our work relationship, which is a lot of phone calls over the course of the last decade. And
It's
you know,
incredible.
yeah, no. So and then he like I graduate in 2010,
Okay.
and that's right around when he's starting on Detective Comics.
Yep.
And so that like and I end up getting he puts me in contact with Shelley Bond
Sure.
and Joan Hilty at
Yep.
Vertigo, and I was a Vertigo intern for about from fall 2010. So it was right when they announced the like the new triumvirate of Jim Lee, Dan DiDio, and Jeff
Right.
Johns as the creative leads.
Right. Because
Uh,
Paul steps down in like
yes,
2009. Right. Right.
yeah.
Right. Right. Yep.
So so I was that's when I was in the office, like,
So
and yeah,
now that, like that, I mean, let's get a minute here.
yeah,
So, the New York of it's not overwhelming. I mean, by that point you've adjusted,
yeah.
right? But you're coming into DC Comics. I mean, what was that about? What was that like?
It was incredible. It
Yeah.
was that I desperately wanted to know how this whole world worked, and it showed me all the sides of comics that I knew. I realized how naive I had been about.
Mm, like
And
what? That's too much fun. Come on, like what?
I mean, the I would say the most like obvious side effect of me going to working in the offices is after that point I stopped bagging and boarding my books. It's like that was the moment that it was just like, oh, these are like
There's a
just
zillion of them.
stacks of them everywhere. It's just like, yes, I will bag and board special comics, but
Yep.
I do not need to be this anal about all of them. It also, it showed being there for that moment, and it was a rough transitional moment. Like I helped pack a bunch of people's offices up, like
Uh,
because Joan Hilty was part of hiring me, was let go in that transition, so
uh,
I helped her pack her office up.
uh,
She ended up being the person I was coordinating with for the Batman Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles miniseries years later,
wow.
because she with her work at Nickelodeon. But then and then also I helped. He wasn't leaving the company at that point, but Pornsak,
Right.
Pisha Shode, I'm not
Mhm.
pronouncing that right.
You did
Uh,
much better than me. Sorry, porn star. Yep.
but Pornsak, who's an incredible person, and he's actually
Yep.
the person who put Memetic in front of the Seth Rogen and
I
Evan
didn't know that.
Goldberg.
Okay.
He's the one who
Yep.
passed it along, because they were asking him when he was still at Vertigo if there were any Vertigo properties he should look at, and he also mentioned, like, you should check out Memetic. So
Wow.
I am indebted to
Thank you, porn
Pornsak.
sack, and me too. Yep.
He's a great guy, and
Yep.
he an incredible writer in his own right. Infidel is a phenomenal book.
It's a great
Uh,
book. Absolutely.
but the but yeah, so
So that's mind blowing. Like you're
but yeah,
coming in, and these folks that you're, exposed to and interacting with are tremendous talents. You
yeah,
know, they're
yeah,
they're they're that's pretty incredible.
yeah, no, and honestly, that it showed me very quickly, like, that there is, like, for better and for worse, the business side of this industry, which can be very cutthroat and it can be very harsh, and there are some hard realities that I needed to face. And so I was hoping that I would be hired as like an assistant editor out of the program,
Wow.
but there were no because there had just been such a big shift, there were no open positions. And so I left DC at the end of in January 2011, and I was just like, okay, like, thank you so much. And I was bummed. I thought it was like that was the end of a path, and that it was being
Wow.
closed off.
Wow.
Uh, and so I ended up I got a job in advertising, and I was a copywriter
Wow.
for a small digital ad firm, writing, Facebook games for Dexter, and
Wow.
like doing all this other stuff. But it was I wasn't sure what my way in was, and I was hoping that I realized that it's like, okay, I'm going to do the advertising thing, and then in my spare time I'm going to write comics, and I'm going to try to get them published in some independent places, and try to build up from scratch from there. And that, like, that was my rough game plan. And so I was still sending Scott stuff that I was writing,
Mm.
uh, and Scott was still using me as a sounding board for his work. And so that was all continuing, and there was this back and forth. And then right in the middle of all of that, DC launches the New 52, and Scott
So now
Snyder
we're in
goes
20, is it
2011,
okay, okay. Yep.
uh, September 2011. So and that's when Scott Snyder goes from indie writer Scott Snyder to being like
Bam.
Scott Snyder.
Yep.
And it's the launch of the Snyder Capullo New 52 Batman run, which is a runaway hit on, one of there were plenty of things about the New 52 that did not work, but that was the big piece that worked the best.
Yep.
Uh
Court
and
of Owls.
Oh yeah, and added a big new piece to the mythology, and all of that. So that really that was a really exciting moment. But I was feeling bummed, because I was that was happening separate, and I wasn't really a part of it. And then I got a call one day while I was working in advertising, and and at this point Scott has made a few introductions. I've met a number of people, but Scott gave me a call that he had gotten a call from Dan DiDio saying that, hey, for the top books in the line at DC right now, we're going to expand all those issues by 8 pages each and add backup stories and all of that. And they wanted Scott to write the whole thing, but Scott at that time was writing Batman, Swamp Thing, American Vampire, and an American Vampire miniseries that was coming out concurrent to the main title. And so all of that was happening all at once, and he was just like, I need to bring in a co-writer for the backup stories, and I want to use James. And that's the story of how Batman #8 of the New 52 is my first my first comic book.
Now you should be universally hated for that phrase. So
Yeah.
Batman is my first comic book.
Yeah.
I think the last person that said that had to have been Bill Finger and Bob Kane. I mean, I don't think anybody's ever started on Batman. That is insanity.
Yeah, it was scary. It was pretty freaking scary. And it's especially, this is something where having spent 4 to 6 months inside the DC offices, having been working on the collaborating with Scott, at least on a sounding board level for the previous however many years at that point, it would have been about 3 years at that point. I knew that people burn out quick in comics. People come in, and if you do not come in strong, you're gone. And that's scary. So it's just like, I have this huge opportunity. It is the biggest opportunity in comics. And I have the safety wheels of Scott is co-writing with me, but this is the moment. This is the sink or swim moment, and I have to deliver. And if I don't deliver, I'm going to be working in advertising for the rest of my life.
Well, and let's unpack that for a second, because I think contextually there's a couple important things to point out, which is you talk about, if you don't deliver, you're out. And the thing is in the sort of, comics exists in many different sort of different realities, right? So, but the reality that we're talking about here is the direct market, the comic book shops. And that arena is ruled by Marvel and DC. And so you're coming in at the apex, right? So it's like, really kind of what we're talking about is that, and now I'm going to tease you because you're not a sports guy, but it's like, now I'm going to use the sports analogy. Philip Sablick, who's our president of publishing at Boom, he doesn't know anything about sports, and I always use these sports analogies, and he's like, so but it's like, your first time you're playing football, you're playing in the NFL.
Yeah.
And that's, a very high level to be coming in at, not having any experience.
Yeah.
And there's certainly people that break in really low in the ecosystem of like a Kickstarter project, and then sort of work their way up into some of the bigger independent publishers, and then might spend a big stretch of 5 to 7 years at Dark Horse or IDW or a certain place before they're given a shot to come in at Marvel and DC. And you're just walking, you're not walking in off the street. And certainly all that apprenticeship with Scott on, certainly your background going back to Joseph Campbell stuff, and your focus on being really serious about your career, devoting your time in high school to loading up your coursework, and then, sort of having the focus of the way that you go after Sarah Lawrence for specific reasons, and just all your tactics and approaches then pay off, which is huge, because you had done a lot of reps, but at the same time, you're definitely skipping the line. Like I've started working in comics in 1993, and I have never heard of anybody that has done this like that. I mean, this is beyond a unicorn. Like
and to be honest, I think that there were plenty of people who did not like that and were not thrilled about it when I was getting started. And it's
a basis for professional resentment.
And it was also something that I knew, and this sort of, this gets us into kind of the next step, because that led to, like, the backup stories, and I'm very proud of those first backup stories I did with Raphael Albuquerque, tying into the Court of Owls storyline.
I don't know if you know this, by the way. I'm the first person that published Raphael in North America.
That's amazing.
Yeah,
That's so
it was
cool.
he had a image book that was solicited that never came out, but that pre-exists that. But yeah,
Yeah.
I Raphael is a I cannot respect. I adore that man. I think he is hung the moon. But go ahead.
Yeah, he is absolutely incredible. And then I followed that up by for Scott's second year in the book, doing the death of the family. I did backup stories with Jock. So it also was like, and this is something that I think is that I do wish would change, honestly, in the comics industry. Is normally I think that people who are just breaking into the industry, or writers who are just breaking into the industry, are often paired up with artists who are just breaking into the industry.
Mm,
And they are both kind of figuring their shit out at the
yep,
same time.
yep,
I got one of the big benefits that I had going in is I was getting to work with Rafa and then getting to work with Jock. I was
yep,
working with some people at the height of their skills, and I saw, like, oh, I wrote this thing and then they tweaked it in this way and made it better. And
yep.
I understand how that happened. And
That's
some of
amazing.
that it would take me years to learn that. And but it is something that helped me. That helped me hugely. I started realizing very quickly what I was overdoing and what I was underdoing. And then I started adjusting. And some of those adjustments, I think I adjusted in the correct direction. Some of them I didn't. And there was a lot of trial and error. But I realized very quickly that, especially at DC, a lot of what I was doing was being driven by the fact that Scott trusted me and Scott had my back, and the Bat office had my back and they trusted me. But readers and retailers still really had no idea who I was, and I was just
Mhm.
this. I was 24 years old. I was a kid, and I was on the highest platform and all of this, and I needed to prove myself, and
Mhm.
I needed to start trying to and I needed to make my headway into creator owned, because I knew that that is where people would start to see what was different about a James Tynion comic to a Scott Snyder comic. Because while I was working, especially working under Scott on the Bat books, even where, like, my tastes and Scott's diverge, like, I was still like, Scott's taste won out because
Yeah,
it's his book.
it's his
Like,
book. Sure, of course.
and so I was leaning my tastes in his direction.
Okay, so that was the first part of a two-part interview that I did with James. We've got another hour coming next week, and we'll get into Something is Killing the Children. We'll talk about Department of Truth. We'll talk some about the Tiny Onion publishing he's doing. There's lots of fun stuff. The biggie is, of course, the creation of Punchline, which he gets into in great detail. So it's a lot of fun. I had a blast doing this. I hope that you enjoyed watching it. In particular, I want to draw attention to people that are aspiring to write, to pay attention to the way that James detailed how much time and dedication that he put into building his career. He was blessed to be able to be attending a high school where he could use electives to take English classes, but he attacked that with gusto, even though at the time he was thinking he was going to be a novelist. And then the way that he pursued Sarah Lawrence and how it was in keeping with his interest in Joseph Campbell, which was seated in the high school level. So, and how he used Campbell and thought about Campbell in heroic storytelling. And so I think all these pieces are super important to put him on the path to be able to intersect Scott Snyder, which is obviously huge, and then gets him to where he needs to go with Batman. And I've never heard of anybody getting that kind of a pathway. But what it all goes to, there's two ways that you can look at this as James breaks in. The first way that you can look at it is, that's impossible. It'll never happen to me. I live in another country. I live in Alaska. I live in wherever, and I can't get to Sarah Lawrence, and Scott Snyder doesn't teach there anymore. And so I don't have a chance. So you can look at it like that. Or you can look at it of, look at James. What he did was he did the work. and he was always a heat-seeking missile focused on what he wanted to do. He figured out he wanted to be a writer, and then he attacked it, and he attacked it with everything he had. And the result of that was that he was prepared when the opportunity presented itself. Because when Scott shared the script with James, James was able to give him 10 pages of written notes of opinions. And of course, some were good and some were bad. That's just the luck of the, that's how it goes. That's how you build your craft. But there was enough good in there because he had done the work. It's the Malcolm Gladwell concept of 10,000 hours. He'd done 10,000 hours worth of work so that he was prepared. And when it was an opportunity presented itself, he was able to give good notes, which made him somebody that Scott wanted to bounce his ideas off of, which then led to, when Scott's workload increased, that he needed help, and he turned to James because they had a special relationship. So aspiring writers, note, pay attention. This is about work, 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 work and work and work and work. Set your goals, dedicate yourself. Writing comics is not something where you just, the people that are in the stands during a basketball game don't just get up and, never having played basketball, walk onto the court and start dunking. So you got to do the work, you got to practice, you got to, work your way through a process. So anyway, I will see you next week as we talk about Punchline and Something is Killing the Children, Department of Truth, all sorts of fun stuff. James is a blast, and let me know what you think in the comments. And don't forget to subscribe. Thanks.